our culture is so wildly different than it was in 2017. It's worth actually talking about. I mean, it's like it is very, 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 very different. There's a lot to be gained right now from a certain kind of right of center influencer in pretending that, the left still has this very strong control over culture to the point where you can't speak your mind and whatnot. I myself feel like, you have something to lose by giving that talking point up. I ran a conference called Hereticon. Like, it's not so dangerous to say interesting things anymore. And in 2017, it really was. I think we were right at the edge with Hereticon. Like, I want the idea for it. It was 2019, right? Like, we were supposed to do it March of 2020. That would have been still dangerous. I was getting called a Nazi when I wrote the essay for it by Neil Dash. Like, I will never forget the insanity of that. 2020, it was January 2022. So it's end of 2021. We're getting ready. And I think that was like the last moment you could really do something like that. And then from that point on, I really feel like we're, at least in tech, I feel like we are certainly, I don't know that we're winning the culture of tech, but there's room for us to exist, and it's fine.
Antonio, when did you get canceled? What month?
I mean, which of the many times? I guess the Apple thing was 2020, I think. I'm not sure. I think it was that
But
summer.
Like October, November, was it post-election?
Feels like it was late. No, it was like May, June. It was early summer. Because I remember I left Branch in 2021. No, it was 2021, actually. It was spring of 2021.
It just has some vibes of like the end of the Roman Empire or whatever, and like, like Trump is getting kicked out of the office, and like you're getting into an environment where you're not going to.
It's like the last guy to die of a disease before the vaccine arrives, right?
Yeah,
it's like you're that sucker who died of whatever it was, typhus in the Alaskan village before the Iditarod sled showed up with the cure. Yeah, exactly.
Eric, wait a second. How is your camera getting worse? I thought you were like upgrading your situation. It's like we're back to Somali pirate. I'm sure the comments are going to be like, yeah, like Eric looks like he's back to raiding ships off of the Gulf of Aden or whatever.
The mic is perfect though. One thing at a time. I got to get it.
Yeah. So for the people listening, Eric, sounding smooth, but for the people watching, it's like kind of burning your eyes with bleach.
How'd we get on the topic of families?
My child scratched my nose this morning, so I kind of look like I'm an MMA fighter, despite having no ability to do any fighting whatsoever.
And then how'd you get from that to single moms?
Surrogacy.
Yeah.
I was like, how many are you having? And he's like, 3 is the plan eventually, but I don't know if should be blowing up all these things on, because we're recording now.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I think it's a complex topic of like, how do you navigate, if you have natural born children and a number of them, and then it's like you want another one, like you go to surrogacy. It's like, how does the dynamic play with the kids? Maybe I'm overthinking that. And then I think just generally surrogacy as a topic in general, I think we were talking about and I think Solana and I are somewhat on the same page in the sense that like we think it's actually a good thing. Like my view is like more kids are better, and we should be doing things society policy wise to increase the number of children. So Antonio can weigh in on children. He has plenty. So
I'm the last guy you want to ask about children.
Speaking of MMA, I'm gonna try jiu-jitsu with a few friends, inspired by Elon chickening out, I guess.
Wait, hold on. Didn't you like blow out your knee last year playing basketball?
I tore my Achilles, but apparently, it's easy on the Achilles.
Who's your dream fight?
That's a good question. I gotta think about that. Do you guys have any dream fights at the moment?
I can think of a few startup competitors I want to beat the shit out of.
I kind of want to fight. No, I don't. You know what? I don't want to say his name because the second I feel like it's just going to make him like, I don't want him to even know that I think about him. So that there is a person I have in mind who I would love to fight, but I'm not going to say it.
Yeah. Look, I think the only way I'd want to do any fighting is I would want to do the Zuck routine where I spend like 3 years training silently and then challenge people publicly to a fight. That seems to be the way to get the competitor to not want to fight you. Although, I mean, look, there was an attempt to show up to the house. Like, I think this drama isn't going to go away anytime soon.
Is that real? I can never tell what's real. I just, my default assumption online now is just that nothing that I'm reading is real. It's all just people LARPing.
The only 1 million people that actually exist in the world LARPing on Twitter.
Shall we get into it?
Yeah, let's
Let's
talk
do
about
it.
this big interview. Like,
Yep.
maybe give us the inside scoop. It's like, how did this come to be?
Mike,
You know what I mean?
you broke the internet with Peter Thiel interview for people who haven't yet seen it. Yeah, Mike, give us the breakdown.
All right. So I've known Peter for 15 years about. He is, a friend. I work for him. I'd say he's mostly, I think, probably he's a mentor. And I was very young when I met him, and he's given me every opportunity I have. And it's this, like, he's this very central figure in my life. And I've avoided doing stuff with him because it just feels, it like makes it all dirty somehow. When you're doing something, like, I care about him a lot, and I care about our like working history a lot. And so to bring it to the internet and to do like some interview with him or whatever, I've dragged my feet for a long time, because I just didn't want to deal with the comments and things like this. But finally, I mean, The Diversity Myth is a book that he wrote in the early to the mid 90s. It was 1995, I believe, with David Sachs. And it's coming up on 30 years. And there's this interesting thing. So when I first met him, he hadn't yet written 0 to 1. When I came on at Founders Fund, it was to build a class of his at Stanford out called CS 183. That would become 0 to 1, which is the book that he's known for. At the time that I met him, he had this book that nobody ever talked about, including him. It didn't come up in interviews. It didn't come up in even there were. I lived in New York, so not many people knew him at that time. But in San Francisco, when I moved out, I mean, everybody knew who Peter was, and they had not read The Diversity Myth. That was not a thing that anybody cared about. It was about the sort of deranged politics of the Stanford campus in the late 80s and the early 90s. And I mean, really what it was wokeness before we had that word wokeness. What happened, though, after the mid 90s was it all kind of went away. And that kind of straight up through, I went to college. I graduated in 2007 and in Boston. So like very liberal town. None of that stuff, like the political correctness and whatnot, like you could talk about all sorts of crazy stuff when I was in college. And so by the time that I met Peter in, say, 2009, I read his book. He had never recommended that I go and read it. I just found it online. I read it. In one of our coffees, I brought it up, and he was sort of like embarrassed about it. And I think it was because, and we've talked about it since, the embarrassment surrounding it. And he's confirmed that my assumption was correct. He just felt that he got the premise wrong. He felt like he had sort of made a mountain out of a molehill, and he was nut picking and throwing fruit basically at the dumbest people alive. And yeah, it was funny to make fun of the crazy campus stuff, but none of it really mattered. And one of his premises, which is like, this stuff was actually very important, what was happening on the Stanford campus, this sort of deranged leftism, anti-Western civilization, identitarianism, the quotas and all of this, like that was going to take over everything. That was going to be this huge, important movement in the country. And so by 2009, that seemed really not the case. I go on to work with Peter. I think in 2011, end of 2011, I started working at Founders Fund when I went to go work at his class. And within a couple of years, maybe like 2-3 years, you start seeing the first inkling of what would become like the craziest wave of political correctness in American history. I mean, the stuff goes on to take over every institution in the entire country. And so looking back now in 2023, Peter looks like Nostradamus. Like he's the only book that has correctly predicted the next 10 years of culture in America. And so we thought, let's just do a retrospective on it. And he had actually already been, and he'd been thinking about this himself. So we got together and we did an interview, just sort of looking back on Diversity Myth 30 years later. And I would say right out of the gate, before we can take this discussion wherever you guys want, but just I guess last thought on it is just like what I think is pretty interesting is I went in thinking, okay, he was embarrassed 15 years ago when I brought up the book, and he was. And when I brought it up over coffee, it was like, he didn't really want to talk about it, and he tried to sort of move it along. He's like, I would do things very differently now, but I mean, I don't think I was wrong, but blah blah blah. I expected him to be like, I'm vindicated. Like, I'm right about everything. Like, knocked it out of the park. And I thought he would do like a victory lap or something. And there was some of that when before the interview, when we first started talking about this again. And, he's like, yeah, sure, I was correct about a lot. But he felt strongly that it was like, the phrase he uses was like, he was not even wrong. Like, he was right about a lot of stuff, but he was not even wrong about the most important things, which are all of the things that we weren't paying attention to while we were paying attention to the stupid culture war stuff. And kind of, we break the interview down into like 4 sections, 4 big buckets of sort of broad Western or stagnation across the West, and especially in America, which would be sort of science, technology a little bit, economics, religion, and then finally politics. These like broad spaces where we've really stagnated, and like that became sort of the substance of our discussion.
Can I just comment on that? A couple things. One, Peter obviously feels so strongly, or I don't know what spurred his revisiting of the diversity myth, but he also gave a speech that turned into a post at the New Criterion that I think is also very good. And I myself am writing kind of a response to that for Tablet Magazine right now. But I was interesting that he struck some of the same tropes in that piece. But just to give Peter Thiel even more credit, I was having kind of this, I was at Berkeley shortly after the time he was at Stanford, and I had kind of the same ideas because, of course, at Berkeley, all these same strains of leftist thought were there, or even more. And I'm like, man, these people sound like a bunch of militant idiots, but like, they're never going to run even like a hot dog stand, much less anything else. And then one day, 20 days later, you wake up and they're running everything, right? Because people kind of forget that actually the U.S. was kind of conservative for a while. You had the Bush years. You had John Yoo, who was writing the Guantanamo Abu Ghraib memos, was at Berkeley, right? Like the political zeitgeist was very different. And this was kind of a weird niche extreme thing. And to see it taking over all of society was, I think, extraordinarily appreciated.
I really wonder about, because I don't have much of a memory of like 1999, other than I remember seeing The Matrix. I was like in my I might have been, 14, I think then. So like I wasn't really paying attention to politics stuff. I wonder what college campuses were around then, because 2001, you have September 11th. And I think that maybe that is what kept a lot of this shit out for a while. Like, it just seems so serious that no one really had patience for the other stuff, maybe. But I wish that I could go to a college campus, maybe in the year 2000, and just see what that was like before the towers came down.
Yeah, I'm curious if we have kind of a hypothesis, and maybe what you just said is it, on why it sort of came and receded and then surged back. Because if we have some sort of hypothesis, we can also ask, what would cause it to surge back again?
Certainly, it feels like the internet, like social media, as a distributive or a channel of distribution for the ideas seems pretty powerful. And then also distance from a real enemy maybe seems really powerful. Like you're really far, but then again, the first wave of it happened while Soviet Union was still like alive and well. So I don't know.
I mean, the other thing to remember is that you realize the American establishment center left was totally in favor of the global war on terrorism. The New York Times completely lined up behind the Afghan and Iraq wars. Berkeley did not, but again, it was an extreme point. I remember shortly after 9/11, the Berkeley City Council passed some resolution against the Afghanistan war or something, which, can you imagine a little college campus passing international resolutions? But Berkeley, crazy Berkeley would do that, but the rest of the mainstream left didn't, right? And at all. And so I think things were just, it was a very different vibe back then, I guess.
Yeah, but like you could also just trace it like Obama years. You kind of have the right people in power. People are feeling good, like first black president, and then you kind of worm your way into 2014, where you're kind of the end of the Obama presidency, but you have Ferguson. When is Gamergate? Like, is Gamergate 2014 era?
Yep.
It's like the social media is finally starting to pick up, and like
Yeah.
the kind of like very online disease of the reporters in a world where their job security is way lower, like media is kind of getting crushed by the growth of all of these social media platforms. That concoction feels like the kind of like growth vector for a lot of these ideas to come raging back.
The idea of America as a white supremacist country, like it was 2012 or 2013 the first time that I saw that, and I remember being like, "That's fucking crazy!" Like what a crazy person would say something so extreme. Like that's just a wild, crazy person online. But that was the beginning of this stuff, and it was like it was super niche. It was, you would see it on I wrote for a blog called Thought Catalog back then. Now it's just like clickbait farm. But back then it was like still at 2012. It had I thought there were some interesting writers there, and you would, in the comment section, I would see a lot of this stuff, and I remember warning even people on at Founders Fund. I was like, things are getting crazy out there, like on gender specifically. I'm like, you guys need to be really careful what you talk about. Like, I think this thing is going to get like pretty dicey. And I mean, I never saw the Me Too years coming, but yeah.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Are you building a business? Well, if you haven't already been asked by potential customers or investors about things like SOC 2, ISO 27001, GDPR, or HIPAA compliance, well, guess what? You will be. Achieving compliance can actually unlock major growth for your company and build a foundation of trust. And Vanta can help. Vanta automates up to 90% of compliance work, getting you audit ready in weeks instead of months, and saving you up to 85% of associated costs. Vanta scales with your business, helping you successfully enter new markets, land bigger deals, and earn customer loyalty. And bonus, our Moment of Zen listeners get $1,000 off Vanta. Just go to vanta.com/zen. That's VANTA.com/ZEN.
If you're a startup founder or executive running a growing business, you know that as you scale, your systems break down and the cracks start to show. If this resonates with you, there are 3 numbers you need to know: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamline accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down costs. 1, because your business is one of a kind, so you get a customized solution for all your KPIs in one efficient system with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist, designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/zen. That's netsuite.com/zen to get your own KPI checklist. netsuite.com/zen. It is crazy to think that 10 years, 15 years after Thiel and Sachs write this book, that they think they exaggerated it or made a mountain out of a molehill. I get why it surged back in 2012 or 2013, but what caused it to leave in or kind of calm down in the first place? Do you think it's mostly sort of 9/11 war on terror, or is it something else?
No, because I don't know, because I wish that I had more of a memory of Peter was off campus. I've asked him, and he didn't really have much of an answer there because he wasn't on campus. Like, you got to remember, so him and David, right? Like, the funny thing about it is they wrote this book and then they went on to become 2 of the most important businessmen in like a generation. Obviously, definitely a generation. Like, in my opinion, like, I mean, I'm a fanboy of Peter, so I'm like, he's up there all time importance. But like, they had other shit going on in their life, and like, no one was asking them about the diversity myth. So I don't know. I have no sense of what it was. My sense, I do have some. I think that it was weaker by like very, very weak, to the point where people are rolling their eyes at the word politically correct by 2001. But it's just like, after that, like, no one's even paying lip service to it. I mean, I had an English professor who, like, we did Huckleberry Finn. We had a thing on American literature, and like she was dropping the N-bomb, white woman dropping the N-bomb in class, like in an intellectual way. And I remember, and she would encourage, I don't want to say she encouraged us to do it, but she was like, she challenged us to, she was like, well, why would you not? It's literature and blah. And I'm like, God, looking back, that is now unthinkable. That was in like 2006 or 2007. Like that's just, we were in a very different place than we are today. And than we were in the early 90s, I think.
Yeah. One other thing to think about is just like, people forget, because I think Trump is just clouding everyone's model for things. But if you look at the 24 years between the book and Trump, 16 of the 24 you have a Democratic president, right?
Yeah.
right? And in the case of Clinton, you have a president, the whole Monica Lewinsky thing, but the economy was just like on fire. So any centrist Republican or whatever doesn't want to get into any version of a culture war is completely happy with the Democrat in office. And anytime you have a Democrat in office, all this stuff tamps down.
Yep.
And I think with Bush, and I would love actually a good treatment on Bush, like Pearlstein. Who's the guy who wrote the Nixon line? Pearlstein. It would be interesting to get actually that level treatment of like he's done with Nixon or Reagan of the Bush 2 years, because I wasn't old enough to like appreciate that. Maybe Antonio, you have a little bit more appreciation, but I do feel like Iraq and Afghanistan sucked up a lot of the kind of like progressive energy rather than identity politics.
Yeah.
Well, it's not only that they ignored kind of talking about it to focus on their business, but I mean, during the height of sort of, the 2015, 2016, I mean, Sachs had to apologize for it a few times, right?
I think it might have even been to Kara Swisher that he did it, but it was like very embarrassing. And I wish that he hadn't, because I don't think that he should have. I don't think he did anything. David Sachs did nothing wrong.
He certainly made up for it.
But that I think is more interesting in the light of like the question of whether or not we are in a vibe. We've experienced a vibe shift now. And I think in tech, it's very clear that we have. He would never apologize today for that book. Our culture is so wildly different than it was in 2017. It's, I think, worth actually talking about. I mean, it's like it is very, 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 very different. I think there's a lot to be gained right now from a certain kind of right of center influencer in pretending that, the left still has this very strong control over culture to the point where you can't speak your mind and whatnot. I mean, I myself feel like, you have something to lose by giving that talking point up. I ran a conference called Hereticon. This is like a big part of stuff that I've talked about for a while, but I genuinely do. And one of the difficulties, honestly, in doing another Hereticon, people always ask me, are you doing it? When are you doing it? Can I come to it? And it's like, yes, but it has to be very different. I have to find a way to sort of reframe it and find another interesting sort of thesis for the whole thing, because I do believe the culture is significantly changed to the point where it's not so dangerous to say interesting things anymore. And in 2017, it really was. And 2020, I mean, the summer of 2020, I'll never forget as long as I live. That was insane. But I think we're kind of past it.
Okay, you're saying Hereticon is mainstream?
I think I got criticism in that vein, and I'm like, it's not. I think it's like it's worth considering. I think for the next one, it's like a note that's worth incorporating.
Can I get my job at Apple back now? Then is that it? Are we over the little panic now? Now, if David Sachs doesn't have to apologize, can I just go get my little FANG job now?
I think it's a really good point, and maybe you're right. Like, do you think it's not over?
Oh no, I think there probably has been a vibe shift. But by the way, I was going to recite Kafka has a great line that the Messiah will arrive when he's no longer necessary, and so like Hereticon, if you need a Hereticon, something is deeply wrong. In some sense, you've arrived to the Messianic age if you don't need the Hereticon anymore. Right?
I think we were right. By the way, I think we were right at the edge with Hereticon. Like, I want the idea for it. It was 2019, right? Like we were supposed to do it March of 2020. That would have been still dangerous. I was getting called a Nazi when I wrote the essay for it by Neil Dash. Like I will never forget the insanity of that. 2020. It was January 2022. It's end of 2021. We're getting ready. And I think that was like the last moment you could really do something like that. And then from that point on, I really feel like we're, at least in tech, I feel like we are certainly, I don't know that we're winning the culture of tech, but there's room for us to exist, and it's fine.
Antonio, when did you get canceled? What month?
I mean, which of the many times?
Which time?
I guess the Apple thing was 2020, I think. I'm not sure. I think it was that
But
summer.
like October,
I wrote about
November, was it post-election?
Making Space for Monkeys was the name of the piece that I wrote about you.
Oh, man. Nice.
Wait, but Antonio, was it in the fall?
Feels like it was late. No, it was like May, June. It was early summer. Because I remember I left Branch in 2021. No, it was 2021, actually. It was spring of 2021.
it just has some vibes of like the end of the Roman Empire or whatever, and like, you know, like Trump is getting kicked out of the office, and like you're getting into an environment where you're not going to get canceled, and you somehow got whacked with the sword right at the end.
Yeah,
where's
Like flailing last bit of cancellation smacked Antonio on the way out.
It's like the last guy to die of a disease before the vaccine arrives, right?
Yeah,
You're that sucker who died of whatever it was, typhus in the Alaskan village before the Iditarod sled showed up with the cure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But to Dan's point too, I mean, Biden's in office, so like if Trump comes back, I mean, I'm gonna look really dumb. If Trump comes back and this stuff goes back to like level 9, then
it's fine. Dan has enough crypto. He'll make sure we get the nice house in the camps, and we'll get the good soup. We'll get the good potato. They'll scoop it from the bottom, so you get a little bit of the bacon in it, right? That's how it worked in the camps. That's how it's going to be, right?
Oh my God. Yeah, I think there are enough antibodies now. Where
there's got to be, you know, certainly my United elite status is good for something in the gulags, right? Do I at least get the board first?
Yeah, that's actually that they give the 1K United get the first plane out of the country when things are really going bad.
Yeah, clearly.
But no, I think one thing I would give credit, like I always love giving them credit for this, but I do think Substack materially changed the discourse because it took an elite set of people on both sides of the aisle. I mean, it gave a voice to, I think, like intellectual right-wing people, or right-leaning people, we'll maybe not call them right-wing. But then the fact that Noah Smith and Matty Iglesias and all these other people are on Substack, I think brought back a little bit of like blog culture and a little bit more of like there's something upstream of the blood sport arena that is Twitter. And I think in doing so, I don't know, like it feels like there's a little bit more nuance when something's happening. I mean, look at the recent Richard thing, right? Like the fact that he could just respond in a very long Substack to his own subscribers and not have to be intermediated by the media, right? Imagine if Travis Kalanick had like a newsletter with 250,000 people. I mean, I guess he could have pushed it out on the Uber app, but like you know, my side of the story type thing, it feels like that has become a lot more prevalent now. Whereas maybe, you know, in 2017, the media still had a big hold on what the narrative it was for the day.
Yeah.
I think it's no good.
Travis could have been like Palmer Luckey times 100 or something in terms of like the moral credibility that he would have with builders and people in the ecosystem if he kind of stood up for himself. Maybe only after a certain time.
I just don't think it, like you just said, he could have put it up on the app or something. And there were people, it was more, I think culture had to change before we were ready to care about what he was going direct. This is the Me Too era. Like people didn't even, I mean, we were still at a point where, I mean, Richard apologized. That should be his death sentence in keeping with the rules of these people. And yet, here he is and everything's fine. His book hasn't been, I thought for sure his publisher was going to drop his book. I mean, he's a confirmed white supremacist. Like it's what and I'm not saying, I'm saying from their perspective.
Yeah. It doesn't have the same punch that it did, right? Like you call enough people white supremacists or Latinos and Asians, white supremacists, like, you know, Jews, neo-Nazis, like it's boys cry wolf. Like at a certain point, like those monikers don't stick anymore.
Yeah. Can I give an alternate theory? My favorite tweet about the Hanania thing was somebody tweeted, "Oh, everyone discovers that Richard's actually 10% worse than his public persona." Right? It's like, did you not read everything else that he's published? Like, you're surprised? Like, to me, it was like, okay, yeah, and like, but okay,
right? But like, why was it being published in the first place? It's just, I mean, if we're still on the topic of vibe shift, this is just like more evidence that it doesn't make any sense that someone would have published him. It just, I mean, I often wonder, so am I just getting content pushed to me because all these algorithms have gotten better and they know, like, I'm wondering if I've lost my sense of where culture actually is, or, you know, or if the algorithms have just gotten better. And one recent one was not on, so Twitter is the one where I'm like, I really don't know, that it might just be broken at this point, and I can't tell what's culture and what's Twitter, in a way that I used to feel like Twitter gave me a very accurate sense of what culture was. TikTok, though, and this is a very stupid topic that you guys are going to want to skip right past, I'm sure, but it's very important for this one point. So Snow White discourse. I'm obsessed with
intellectual topics here for sure.
So Snow White, like, and I just was talking about this on my podcast. So I don't, if you guys, we can move on if you want, but
No.
because I
Listen
could
to
go
Solana's podcast as he talks about dwarves not wanting to be called dwarves.
I could go for hours
Yeah,
on
yeah,
Snow White discourse.
This actress is just crazy.
So the actress, she comes out, criticizes the movie, universal hatred. Like, I've never seen it, and this is like she's criticizing the movie on feminist grounds. She's like, it's not 1937 anymore. The prince isn't saving the princess. Snow White's going to go run for president. It's like a whole crazy. They got rid of the dwarves because the dwarves are fucking bigoted. Meanwhile, like, there are dwarvish actors who are like, wait a minute, this is like dwarvish erasure, and we need jobs. And it's like that. It's just where everyone is like, wait a minute, this is fucked up. Like, we should be able to enjoy Snow White. And specifically, I saw it. There was like a weird feminist critique on TikTok, which was from women, young women, saying things along the lines of like, what's wrong with me wandering into the woods, speaking to talking animals, and baking? Like, that's very aspirational. And like, why can't I have that dream? And we're looking, it's like millions of likes on things like this. And so that was one where I'm like, well, that feels like it's got to be the algorithm just like giving me shit that I want. But I could not find a single response in favor of her, even on feminist grounds. And that feels like a major cultural shift.
Did you see the Babylon Bee's reaction to the whole fiasco? The whole headline that like Prince Charming regrets kissing princess and waking her up because he gets immediately lectured. Yeah.
Solana, the one thing I would say, there are two other things. One, I do actually, and this ties back to Peter, I do think the destruction of Gawker was that was destroying a major boss within the kind of woke industrial complex online, right? Like, maybe less Gawker itself, but like Jezebel and some of the kind of like mob mentality that it had the ability to froth up at that, kind of like mid 2010s. And then I also do think, and I think this took off on Twitter, crypto Twitter early, and has since, I think, spread to a lot of other categories, whether it's like the EA AC people or, FinTwit, but it's Anon accounts, right? And like, even your account, like, is a great example where it's like, you're not a face Twitter person. You're Ulysses S. Grant. Like, I think the shift in kind of like the antibodies against the cancellation is like, okay, I'm just going to have an Anon account. And like, it might even be people know that, that account exists, right? Like the most famous Anon account in the mid 2010s was Startup L Jackson. And then like when Startup L Jackson revealed who they were, that no one thought they were funny anymore. And so it was like the Anon accounts that have since come out and have like proliferated, right? Like some of the teapot stuff, I think allows a lot of the kind of like discourse to be interesting, because you can actually point out when the woke mob is being cringe or stupid, and you have no fear of repercussion, right? And this is actually a biology point. It was like your social network supply chain is like that. That's how cancellation works. It's like, how fast can I get to the economic node that I can just then put pressure on and cancel you? And it's really hard to cancel a Roman statue or kind of like, a Midjourney version of Jeff Bezos, like, going through the stars. Like that's like armor. And like, you can now deal with these kind of like woke mobs because they don't have any ability to put pressure on your economic engine. If anything, Elon's paying them. And if you try to get canceled, you're just like increasing the X earnings.
Well, but let me comment on that. By the way, I never believed that PT was Startup L Jackson. I've met the guy in person. He's not nearly funny enough to have been that account. But that's a whole separate story. But you mentioned Teapot, which for those who don't know, TPOT, this part of Twitter, I think is an interesting concept. And it gets to this whole blocking thing with Elon last week, which I guess got canceled. They're not going to cancel blocking. But I've often wondered, as someone who I guess has had 4 different careers, like academia, publishing, tech, and in each of these, everyone thinks to the center of the world. Or if you live in Europe versus the US, and whatever your little community is, it always seems like it's the blinding everything to you, right? I'm curious, like Solana said, like, I'm curious how much of it is real and how much of it, thanks to these block walls, which I think is a good thing, by the way, we've actually walled off our teapot, so to speak, and actually, Kara and all the rest of that crew is still out there, massively influential. We've just kind of fractured social networks effectively, and we don't even know. For all we know, we look like a bunch of fucking lame losers with this podcast, even though I get recognized at the Blue Bottle because of it. And somehow those two worlds coexist. I don't know.
I for sure think that culture has changed a little. I think it's not as authoritarian as it was broadly. And I for sure think that Twitter specifically is no longer indicative of what's going on generally. But this TikTok stuff really throws me for a loop because it is, super left wing. And yet you see these things that you never would have seen before. I see people talking about race in pretty nuanced ways on that app that were not possible a few years ago. And they're getting lots of likes. I think there's a lot of the siloing thing that is happening, but I still think generally things are a little bit different. I mean, what is the last high profile cancellation? Someone who like fully lost everything for something shitty they said or did.
I mean, the other thing, don't forget, remember it was like 2 different people in Virginia, both Democrats. Like it was kind of the end of the Me Too era, and it was like, okay, this is like down the fairway, Me Too, like racist thing or whatever. You should be canceled. And they were like, nah, but I've decided that I'm not canceled. And then they didn't do anything about it. And so it's like, wait a second. So you're canceling right-wing people, but then when, the lieutenant governor or the governor is doing something, free pass. So I think that also reduces the power of it, right? Because then people see it for the farce that it is. And I mean, not to get into like presidential politics stuff, but like the Hunter Biden stuff, I could care less about Hunter Biden, but like all Hunter Biden does is just discredit the moral superiority of that group with anyone who has a brain in the center part of the world, right? Like, the right-wing people would have never cared, like, thought these people were, but like, if you're like a moderate person and you're looking at like the kid glove treatment that Hunter Biden's getting, you're just kind of like, okay, like these people are, completely corrupt. And so I think it creates like a disaffection with anything mainstream culture. And then, so you retreat online and you take the funny dunks, and those are actually more enjoyable than getting anything from the establishment, but whether on the right or the left. I have a question for you, Solana. With Peter, I don't think I've ever seen Peter do like a sit down interview like that. Like he usually does, like I would say is like he does either writes something or he gives a talk, or he kind of compares the two.
He's done a couple. I think he did something with Charlie Rose, and he'll like randomly sit down, but it's few and far between. I think this one was, he really just, we knew what we were talking about. This wasn't some kind of, it wasn't a real interview, I would even say. It was more like a structured discussion on this thing. And so I think he's really hard on, because working with him, my earliest days with him were working on stuff like this, like him delivering thoughts in long form and in public speaking. And so it was this class at Stanford was basically like, I think 12 different, like really beautiful, long, like hour-and-a-half lectures. And he's just really hard on himself. And so I think that this is like, he's a perfectionist and he just wants to make sure that everything gets out correctly. This is a topic he's been thinking a lot about, and he was down. So it was a comfortable environment, and that was that.
Solana, a minute ago, were you implying that the TikTok stuff represents to you this idea that there's kind of like an inter-left war, or kind of the left that we've understood for the last 5 years or so is getting competed from like within the left?
I'm bringing up that to say that I think that the left is not what the left was 5 years ago. Like, I think it's just a very different place now, and they don't have a control of culture. And TikTok is my window into that world, because I still see all that crazy stuff. Like it's all mixed in there. And the way that on Twitter, that's all I used to see. And now it's like, I see like Elon universe stuff. TikTok is a mix of it all. And so what I'm saying is, this is my evidence. I have multiple platforms. So Threads really feels like old Twitter to me, but like still less scary, like less like let's mob and destroy people, but like the politics are roughly the same. Whereas TikTok is a mix. And so everywhere that I look, it's just not as bad as it was a few years ago. And it's not as monolithic, I guess. It seems like there's just, to play on the title of the book I did the retrospective on, there's a little bit more real diversity, I would say.
It's ironic because we've just been sort of talking about the vibe shift of the last few years since 2020, but it's also talking about diversity. It's also interesting to remember that the whole DEI kind of sort of consolidation or spread within tech, it feels like it just happened within a few years. sort of the Tracy Chow, Ellen Pao, Erica Joy sort of
Wait,
continued.
what happened in a few years? That they grabbed the power, or that they lost it? Because by my read,
Both.
they don't have it at all anymore.
Yeah, both. But in like, it feels like they made DEI a thing at every single company in tech in early 2010s, and within venture capital. Venture capital, didn't used to have all this guilt about just being white men all the time, but it did, and it had just happened really quickly with no pushback, basically. Where in not just diversity and inclusion, but also equity. And what does equity mean?
I mean, I think that they were riding a wave that was just much bigger than them. They were just in the same way, honestly, that I think to a certain extent, probably all of us in this group have benefited from the counter wave. Like we've been who we are for a long time. It's just like once culture aligns a little more with you, you have a huge swell of support that you can ride to prominence, and but like accidentally, right? Like I'm just talking about shit I've always been interested in, and it's resonating now in a way that it didn't used to. And I think back to the sort of dark era, the Tracy Chow days, and like that was just a different culture. That's what that was. Like look at their engagement now. No one gives a shit about any of those people. Ellen Pao, she lost her trial, and it was framed as a victory. And I think everybody knew that was bullshit. And today, where is she? Why isn't she in the Rolling Stone Timnit Gebru fantasy edition of whatever? Like there are these sort of like fake celebrities still exist, but not those people. Like the early sort of like pure social justice activist people, gone.
Zerp.
They haven't pivoted to AI safety yet, perhaps. Let's get into the interview a bit, Solana. It's broken down into 4 parts: economics, science, technology, politics, and religion. Maybe you can encapsulate just a little bit of each Thiel's main points, or what you found most interesting.
Yeah, so I want to just preface by saying, like, I hate speaking for him. So you should just watch the interview and get it right. Like he says this stuff, and he'll say it better than I did. But roughly, it's like, let's say with science. So he talks about the stagnation. We all sort of knew there was this crazy politicization of the humanities, and that's where people focus. It's like, oh, it's like, the gender studies or whatever, and that's really this bad thing. It's like, no, it's like way worse what happened in science. Like when you have that in humanities, who cares? If humanities doesn't really matter. Like if you could control alt delete the humanities from American colleges, and like we would still go on. But science, historically, that's where a lot of our research and development took place up until, and he'll talk about this like the 80s, right? Like, or even maybe a little bit before that. But in the 80s is when it becomes really obvious, because that's when like the big, huge science departments didn't matter at all. What mattered was computer science, and no one was studying that. And it's like that's like a very huge fundamental change between how things used to take place in America. You think back to like nuclear physics and things like this, and we just saw Oppenheimer. So he's like, the sort of diversity conversation in that orbit was like sort of stagnating. And then economics, I thought was really interesting. He talks about how everything is more equitable, and yet everyone is worse off. And it's like, wait, like the people who were supposed to be like, you talk about like black people, white people, whatever, like the wealth gap has never been more extreme. And, people can't buy a house and whatnot. And here he made a kind of interesting argument that is somehow both like, he touches on Marxism and libertarianism. And he frames it as sort of like they've both been, in a way, countered in the world of DEI. The left has sort of shot themselves in the foot on economics in favor of this other thing. And maybe there are moments like he talks about Walmart. You aren't paying your workers a living wage, but you're running, this whole DEI Black Lives Matter program or whatever. It's like, okay, they matter, but they don't matter enough to pay a living wage. It's like the living wage used to be the conversation. That used to be what the left was, and it's sort of totally stagnated. Faith is more complicated, and it's like I'm not going to get this right, but I mean, we're not a religious country anymore. And he just talks about the decline of God. He talks about it's sort of interconnecting all of these would be the concept of simulated realities and the multiverse, which are sort of atheistic in his mind, and not there's really no scientific evidence supporting them at all, and yet they've become like these faith concepts that we believe in, and he thinks it's like a complete debasement of sort of both the categories of religion and physics, so science. And then the last one is politics, and he's like, behind all of this is the same struggle that we've had for the last 70 years plus or whatever, which is communism. It's like when you hear the words DEI, all you should really think of is the CCP. Like this is the fight that we've lost track of while we've been destroying ourselves on culture war stuff.
Well, it's ethno-communism, right? Communism came to the United States in racial form, unlike class form like it did in Europe, effectively. Interesting. I had a bunch of questions about the Thiel thing. Can I get into those, Eric?
Please.
and I know, Salah, you're not speaking for Thiel, so I don't want to make you be like his defender or his explainer. But his piece, not that, you should go watch the interview, obviously. But in this piece, I really focused on the religious part of the interview, and I read obviously the piece in the New Criterion. And it's funny, after I read that piece, and potentially after they watched the video, I literally got emails from 2 different Jewish people saying, "What's going on here? He's totally misreading the Bible." Because he, and just to repeat a little bit, what although I broadly agree with them, to be clear, what Peter is saying is that, like, look, if you look at the Judeo-Christian foundations of civilization, there's obviously this focus on victimhood, right? That the Judeo-Christian moral worldview was unlike all the pagan worldviews that preceded it, which obviously worshipped the wealthy, the strong, the successful, right? In some sense, there was a moral inversion in which it turns out the victim has a dignity, right? Now, in my opinion, he sort of muddles the difference between the Judaic and the Christian point of view. For example, he cites that the Christian, the Jewish, man, Freudian slip, the Jewish Exodus story is a little bit of the beginning of, the Jews being this minority people escaping the thing. I wouldn't read the Exodus story that way. And I don't think actually most Jews. He also cites the Cain and Abel story, and he contrasts it with the Romulus and Remus story, which is the pagan story, in which case Romulus kills his brother and founds the great city, while in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain is morally reprimanded by God for having killed his brother, right? So there's 2 different fratricides and the different moral reactions to that. And what he's saying is that in some sense, and it seems to me, tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that Peter, as I think many people on the right are torn between the overweening victimhood of where the Judeo-Christian framework has gotten us, and then the reply to that, which is this sort of knee-jerk, neo-Nietzschean, Bronze Age pervert business of just rejecting victimhood altogether, which he rejects, to be clear, and he explicitly rejects in his piece. And I reject too, by the way. But it seems that, like, and this is what my reaction piece to it is about, really, which is, it seems to me you have lots of Christian conservatives who reject the woke framework, yet who remain stolid Christians, and it seems to me Peter is that as well, but they kind of don't know what to do, right? Like, they can't get off the gospel bus and say, screw the victims, because of course that's a core part of Christianity. On the other hand, it seems to me, and of course maybe I would say this, the shofar is behind me, Christianity doesn't give you a reply to that drive for ever more social justice around ever more victimhood. You can't really say, you know what, we're not going to give a shit about designated victim X, right? Like, it's hard to reply to that, right? And so that seems to me the bind that Thiel was in that piece.
He's not, though, in a bind, I think that you're maybe used to speaking to a lot of Christians who are not actually Christian, or they're not as earnestly Christian as they say they are. What people often get wrong about Peter is he really is just a Christian and he believes in it. And I think his response to the woke, like, what do you do with the wokeness thing? Because that's a victim thing or whatever. It's like, you're just be Christian. Like, he's just actually Christian. This is don't do the sort of the antichrist version of Christianity. Just go to church and be a Christian. Christians believe in forgiveness. So, like, you can exist in a world of victims and forgiveness. Wokeness, I mean, there are a million. I believe he goes through a few of the core differences in the talk. Sorry, we filmed it a handful of months ago. But forgiveness, I think, is like the right there. It's right there in the center, and then also the hierarchy is really weird. Like, so within the sort of wokeness or diversity, like, you have this strange hierarchy of the victim, which doesn't exist in Christianity, and there are a lot of differences, but I would say those two, just right off of the bat, like, what do you do with wokeness? You just don't go to the false God. You worship the real the real Christian God, is what he does. I mean, he's really a Christian. So it's not, you say he's torn. He's not torn at all. Like, he has no issue with it. It's like he understands when it comes to the BAP people, the Bronze Age pervert people, like the new Nietzschean right wing thing, like the anti-victim people. He understands where they're coming from. He's not mad about it, but he's not conflicted about it. He doesn't see anything really. He doesn't seem, from my view, sitting with him and talking about this stuff, he does not seem conflicted about this at all.
Well, right. Well, he calls wokeness a heretical form of Christianity, right? I think he uses the actual word. I mean, I would use the word heresy, which I agree with. It takes elements of the Christian ethos, but then doesn't take some of the beautiful parts of the Christian ethos, which is grace and charity and forgiveness, salvation. Right? No, I completely agree, and it clearly is a twisted form of Christianity. But it's funny. He mentions Girard in his thing. I know he's a serious Girard scholar, and I was rereading what I consider to be Girard's most clearest book, which is I Saw Satan Fall Like Lightning. And Girard dedicates an entire chapter to victimhood. And in fact, Girard, in some sense, concedes that we're living in the age of victimhood, and that in some sense, Christianity could potentially go off the rails. But I guess, yeah, his reaction seems to be very similar to what Peter seems to be, which is, well, just be a proper Catholic, and then the problem isn't quite as big. Which maybe, I guess that's
right. Peter's a Protestant, and I never asked him about the sort of. He seems. I mean, he makes, because I used to talk about my Catholic sort of upbringing, and I was sort of clinging to it still, and he would make fun of it sometimes in a playful way. So I know that he's very Protestant.
I mean, he's too capitalist to be Catholic. Let's face it. Just the Protestants do capitalism better. Yeah.
And his view on the Nietzschean right-wing people is that they don't sort of acknowledge the badness of the past enough.
Well, they don't. He's like, their version of it is like, so you're sort of moderate Republican historian would be like, yes, we did these bad things, but it was a long time ago, and we need to move on. And the left-wing version of it, the woke left-wing version of it, is like, yes, we did these bad things, but it's still who we are, and we can't move on, and we need to like dismantle the whole system. And the Nietzschean right-wing thing of it is like, yes, we did these bad things, and also they weren't wrong. like we're better, and it doesn't matter that we did all these things. And he finds that to be, in a weird way, like I find that he's been. Because he gets all this, he always gets in trouble for talking to people, like having dinner with people or whatever. But he's like, when I hear, he's harder on those people, I would say, than he is on the woke people. I think because it's like the wokeness stuff just feels so stupid that it's hard to take it serious, even while it dominates, culturally. You're just like, but it's so dumb. People can't really believe this stuff, right? Whereas the Nietzschean stuff, it like feels maybe a little more alive. But he's like very understanding of why you would feel that at this point, like just in strong reaction to being told that you're terrible for so long, but probably like, we were bad and we should be better, and you need to be forgiven and sort of move on and make a better world.
As an additional comment on the neo-Nietzscheans, or dare I call them the Baptists? Can I say that? I'm just coining that term. They definitely don't acknowledge the bad. I mean, it's all a LARP, so like whatever. Like I don't believe any of them. They have no constituency, and it's all a fucking LARP. But just to take it seriously for one quick little second, I mean, once you remove the individual dignity of the human, right, and say certain classes of humans contain the spark of God or the image of God, to use the Catholic faith, and certain ones don't, down that road lie unimaginable horrors, of which we've seen plenty in the 20th century, right? And so I don't know how anybody could even take the philosophy seriously on the face of it. And no one actually wants to live in a neo-pagan reality, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I think it's just, there's something really intoxicating for, I remember we probably all had this experience. It's like teenage boys, you pick up, as teenage white boys, you pick up like this implicit sense that there's something bad about you. And when someone starts to tell you like, no, you're great, that's really, really, really intoxicating. When you just feel, you can feel very liberated by that and then radicalized by it. And so I understand where the Baptists are. I for sure understand where they're coming from when you're just so sick and tired of being told that you and everyone like you through history is evil, that you just turn it around completely. You're like, no, we were good and we've always done good and everything we've done has been good and we're going to do more like it. And the only problem today is that we're not more like we were. The things that you're saying are bad. There's a version of this, honestly, in a little bit of like Yarvin stuff too, where it's like like the way to rule is to do everything they say you are actually, which is, and I don't want to bring, because Yarvin's not one of, he's his own unique thing that I think is very interesting. And but
who's Yarvin?
well, I
We
thought maybe you
refer to
wanted
him
to say
as Moldbug on this podcast only.
Moldbug.
Oh, I vaguely heard of him. Yeah.
I get it. Yeah, I get it completely. I also think it's like you said, it does feel like a LARP, because no one is going to be. Does anyone find this stuff compelling? It's a little bit of like Dan and I, before we started, we're talking about like surrogacy and things like this, and these people jump up and they have really strong opinions about things like that. Which, okay, you can have a strong opinion about that, but where is it really coming from? How many of these people even have kids? Like, they were talking about families. Like, do they have families? Are they married? Is Bap married? Does he have kids? Like, it feels like a no to me.
Yeah, I think on the constituency thing, that's my biggest issue with all of the Anon discourse is like, oh, like, look at this, like, you know, provocative opinion, or that this podcast interview, this or that. Like, okay, like, who are you influencing, right? It's like, I think Curtis is probably the most influential in that, like, you listen to a DeSantis and you kind of squint enough and you kind of hear the administrative state cathedral thing. But that's also, at this point, I don't think, you know, it might have started or kind of Curtis might have been pushing it, but that's in a long history of, you know, Burnham and all this other kind of stuff. So I just feel like who is the best politician representing that constituency today? Presidential candidate, elected official. I don't think one exists, right? I think Tucker is
Vivek.
the closest thing.
I think
Vivek.
No way. No,
yeah, but
I think
he's PMC all the way through. He was a Soros. Like, did you see this thing that came up this week? I mean, that now the Oppo is coming out. Yeah, he was funded by Soros. You know, back when he was a Harvard or Yale guy.
Literally funded by Soros. Literally.
I mean, this is like, okay, like, you know, sorry, but like,
he seems like I mean, when he came out against the bank stuff, it's just like, okay, I know what kind of conservative you are. You're just another like free market obsessed, like, let the banks fail, let the whole country collapse, we have to restart. And it's like, I understand all that stuff intellectually, but in one they pick and choose which versions of that philosophy they want to go up in. The only person who ever was like a purist about it for even a second was Rand Paul, when he was standing up there like waffling on the issue of, should black people be allowed to eat at restaurants if a white owner doesn't want them to? And he's over there trying to be like a pure anarcho-capitalist about it. And it's like, that shit that's like, it's crazy. No one wants to live in that world. And, but to his credit, he was at least like living that, like, he was like really trying to rep the purity of that philosophy, like total intellectual consistency of like pure freedom. Vivek's not doing that. He's like picking and choosing which ones. The reason he was okay with the bank failure in Silicon Valley was because people in Silicon Valley are not popular. It was an obvious witch burning moment. And so I've seen people like him before. I don't understand why people like him. I like him a lot less than DeSantis. And I feel bad for DeSantis. I mean, that's a whole other story. He's totally fallen off. I mean, Trump's just going to be president.
But I think, like, to your point about Ron Paul, so if you were to just take presidential candidates in the last 20 years, I'd be curious, like, what others think. If you want to actually say distinct intellectual movements, and intellectual maybe is a generous word here, but in terms of, like, you can actually lump them into something that is different than the, quote, establishment, both on the left and the right, is Ron Paul.
Yes.
Right. And I actually think a lot of what you see in crypto, Bitcoin, like that is a strain of that, and made some amount of progress. I think Bernie Sanders,
yes,
like, true to what Bernie Sanders stands for, and then Trump. And then everything else is just basically some establishment, you know, version, configure a few beliefs here, and you're either an establishment Republican or an establishment Democrat. And like, you know, Liz Warren is like, you know, pretends to be Bernie Sanders, but the reality is she's just, you know, kind of part of the machine. And so, like, that's where we are in the country. Like, those are the so when people were like, oh, BAP, like, you know, is leading a movement, or Yarvin, it's like, okay, like, which one of those?
Well, Trump, I guess you would say
Trump.
Trump.
Not really. Trump is like, Obama makes fun of him at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and basically it's like a spite store presidency. Like, he basically was like, fuck you, I'm going to go run. And then, you know, just rode a wave of populists. But I mean, he was at the Clinton daughter wedding. Like, I mean, he's not an actual, like, deeply rooted in some intellectual movement. It was like pure
But
power
he's-
grab, and obviously
guess
extremely successful.
He does seem to represent that like branch of right-wing stuff, I think, reasonably well. When you see him, so I guess I think about Tucker as just completely formed by Trump. Like Tucker just saw Trump and was like, yes, I'm just gonna do Trump. He just did the media version of Trump. And I think he did it very well, but he was the opposite of Megyn Kelly, right? Like he's just like, I'm gonna do this other thing and like tap into this stuff and represent it. And so when Tucker is talking about self-driving cars with Ben Shapiro, that to me is the moment where he's very clearly distinct. And it's like to come out so strongly against it that feels like maybe I'm giving too much credit to BAP right now, but like that feels like a Bronze Age pervert, like Nietzschean right wing, populist right wing, tapping into something else that's maybe one of the old gods of the right wing.
Well, I think Tucker blew himself up with the Russia stuff. Like I think he actually lost a constituency that used to be in his. I think he had a huge constituency.
The pro Russia stuff.
Yeah. I don't I don't think Trump, like anyone who's supporting Trump can just ignore like whatever Trump says. They're there for the guy. But I do think Tucker isolated a chunk of people who were following him when he kind of went towards the Putin.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's into this day. I mean, that stuff is still infecting the right. Like it manifests in like really sort of just like it's the kind of thing that you can't sit. The average moderate will never sit with, and the average even Republican will never sit with. It's really hard. Like so much of the right wing is informed by patriotism and nationalism, and like it's hard to go all in on such like a clear enemy of the country and like survive that. I think it's a really astute point. I agree with that the Russia stuff definitely dragged him down more so than the Fox News stuff, which he probably lost Fox right because of this.
Yeah. I think that just going back to the intellectual movements that have constituencies, I think Antonio is the one always to bring this up in a group chat where we have people we know who will argue though the ideas matter or whatever. But the reality is like you need to have that idea attached to a host, and a host that can actually drive some amount of political power. I think that there was a moment where people were like, with this DeSantis reelection, where he had 60% of the state. It was like, okay, this is like the second coming of Reagan. He's like kind of still in the Trump camp, a little bit more polished, not a little bit more polished in some regards, more wonky, like, and then he's just completely blown up. And maybe that's the charisma thing or just not good campaigner, but it's just so the disconnect between how well he's done in Florida and the national stage, that was actually quite surprising to me. But yeah. I don't know.
Maybe it shouldn't have been surprising to any of us, because when you think back to his election, right, he wins the state by 60%. I was in Miami for that election, and I mean, we were going, like the people were excited for him and for the red wave in general, and then that doesn't manifest anywhere else but Florida, and so the nation is just it's like maybe in a little bit of a different place. I have no idea though. I could not even begin to diagnose what has gone wrong with DeSantis's campaign. When he announced, I really felt like there was going to be something there.
But the thing is, at the state level, you win based on results, and at the national level, you win based on perception, right? Mm-hmm. Florida is doing very well, right? It's been the number one domestic immigration state alongside Texas for the past, I don't know how many years. People like Florida, right? There's high-speed rail in fucking Florida, and there isn't in California, right? Like things have gone, Miami is booming. I mean, not in a tech perspective necessarily. I know Mike doesn't love Miami, but like broadly speaking, Florida is doing pretty well as a state, right? And like, it's hard to look at that and say, oh, that's been a failure compared to other state examples you could cite. But yeah, it's sad. I don't know.
I mean, honestly, I think that Elon, like, he's not going to run for office and, think what you want of him. But there was that poll, like, you'd be the most popular political figure in the country. I think what people are craving is competence and someone who actually can do 21st century mimetic warfare. And I actually think so many of these politicians, and I think this is where people underestimate Trump, is Trump runs his own media strategy. And just by virtue of being Trump, there's a level of authenticity. You can say what you want about Trump, whether you believe it, but you're getting Trump. And I think the thing that Vivek, I'll give him credit for, is it does feel like he's driving the way he's doing these kind of media moments, sound clips, things that are going viral, his Twitter account. And I think most of the other Republican field is still mired in this 20th century political machine that, you know, like you just have all the advisors and you do everything. And the reality is, I think what people are craving is like, am I getting the person behind this in a world where Elon is firing off missives just like Trump on Twitter, and you know you're getting the immature, flawed human behind that, and a whole bunch of people find that really infuriating, and then a bunch of people think that that's great. And so I think that like that is the thing that I'm most surprised about, and this thing I'm most scared about personally is I think AOC completely understands that, and when she's ready to go for broke, like I think she's going to be really formidable because she's not going to have any intermediary. She's going to be the candidate that you want to see. And she's going to be really successful, I think, with that.
I think that it's going to be in the vein of that, but it's going to be someone who is like it's like a young Bernie Sanders who is attractive and charismatic and strong and vicious. Like I think that's the world that's the danger. I think that's the big bad.
The candidate that can ratio like anyone on Twitter without having to go to their staffer, and whether the staffer's helping, you know, throw some ideas out, but the person who could pick up their phone, see the reply, this is what's happening on Twitter, takes them 30 seconds to come up with that one just banger reply, things that you guys do all the time, that candidate is just going to steamroll. Like the constituency will just form around them very fast because they're internet native. Internet native is, can you dunk? Can you quote tweet? Can you reply guy? In a way that you just ratio the original post and make them look.
You think he's coming back to Twitter? Is he gonna win?
I think I'm convinced that he's gonna be running from a jail cell next November. Like election night, he's gonna be in jail, and he'll embrace it. He'll like, I don't want the guy again. Like my life is just gonna get worse having to listen to people complain about him. But the dude is gonna be running from jail, and like somehow people think that's gonna like stop him from winning. Like it's probably gonna help.
No, yeah, it'll definitely help. And then also if he runs from jail, if he wins, he can pardon himself, right?
In theory, you can't pardon on a state crime. But I mean, like, honestly, if he wins from jail, like you're talking about like threat to democracy, shit's going to go down if he's in jail and he wins. And some like Georgia like sheriff is trying to come and get him. That you want to talk about constitutional crisis? There you go.
I never thought about the self-pardon. That's like autoerotic self-pardoning. Can you do that as a precedent? I guess
you can do it for federal crimes. Yeah.
Man. And,
well,
by the way,
it's undetermined law, right? I don't think any president's had to do that.
That's so crazy.
And by the way, people think the prison thing is crazy. Miami is the city of the future. The mayor of Hialeah, one of the suburbs of Miami, once ran from jail and won. And
Buddy Cianci had it figured out. He's a corrupt mayor of Providence. Went to federal prison for whatever, and then he came back and I think he either won again. And then the other thing is he had prior to podcast, he had the most popular morning talk show in Rhode Island. Every single person would listen to Buddy Cianci. Like it's just like that is such an era of the machine politics that like we don't have an appreciation for now. And I think like when you see Trump, like people don't appreciate that's how much more it was, and we're just reverting back to the mean.
Going back to Thiel for a second, some people are saying, many people are saying, to quote Trump, that
many such cases.
Yeah, exactly. That Thiel is kind of abandoning or backing away a little bit from the anti-woke cause that he helped, or that he was early to, right at the height of its ascendancy, as this vibe shift is happening. And some people are, speculating that perhaps he he's just a natural contrarian, and so moves to where the alpha is in being contrarian, or maybe it's because he senses this right is very extreme on certain things, like maybe some of them are anti-gay, and obviously Peter is gay, and the things we're talking about here of just like he thinks they've lost their way perhaps, and it's just diversion from the things that really matter, like China, like the economy.
No, I think it's fun. Like people always have people are always speculating on. I think there's always this assumption that Peter has some that he knows everything, and that he thinks he knows everything, and he's actually like completely the opposite of that. He's the most, not the most humble person I've ever met, but he's like the most humble billionaire that I've ever met. And when it comes to like his own, in terms of intellectual giants, he's much more curious than he is interested in telling you what the world is like. And I see this at every table I've ever been at with him. He immediately he's asking questions and he genuinely wants to know what other people are thinking about. The only time I've ever seen him like take control of a table and like now he's going to be monologuing, it's when it's awkward and like people don't have anything interesting to say. And so he'll just like do the table a favor and be Peter for 45 minutes and then like we'll move on. But in general, so when it comes to these topics, for example, to bring it back to your question, I don't think he doesn't seem to have a strong sense of any of these things right now. And I'm not entirely sure I have my assumptions on what is soured him on politics, but it's nothing ideological. He's not like, he doesn't have any strong position on DeSantis versus Trump and like where the party is going or anything. He doesn't think about things like that. He is like he comes at things sideways with a strange idea. There'll be like one piece of the candidate that like for Trump, honestly, it was make America great again. The idea of that, it was like that made Trump the only candidate who agreed that something had gone fundamentally wrong with America. At that point, remember back in 2015, Republicans were still like, this is the greatest country in the world. And then you had Hillary Clinton. Once Trump says, make America great again, you have Hillary Clinton, a Democrat, who was like, nothing, we don't have to make it better at all. Like it's perfect just the way it is. And so because Trump was willing to sort of pull the curtain back and be like, no, this is like the rotting corpse of the giant that it once was, that was compelling to him. And that was the thing that brought him in more than anything else. And I think that right now I guess, again, like I really hate speaking for him. People should ask him these questions but if I were to sort of speculate, I would say that he hasn't seen that interesting thing from anybody yet. And so he's not excited about the machine broadly. I think he's looking for something to be excited about right now.
The thing about the woke stuff, if we just to take it from Peter and just like my point of view is if like to use a Tyler Cowen, is it like underrated, properly rated, overrated? I think it was like underrated before. And, when people kind of weren't talking about it, I think it crested in 2020. And now with, the Rufos, all the stuff, it's properly rated, right? Like the market equilibrium has like now, slowly solving this. Red states are going to do what they want to do. And blue states are going to pretend that that's not an issue or whatever and say algebra is racist. Fine. Like you can have a marketplace of ideas across all these different states. But the thing is that doesn't resonate for a political platform. And I think that that's one of the things that you're seeing with DeSantis flaming out is like his version of the mandate of heaven from this Florida victory was, I'm going to ticky-tack pass laws that look like I am doing stuff against woke, like Florida's universities, you can't do this. And it's like Disney and like all of this stuff that sort of plays well on Fox News. But the reality is that's not like the average American doesn't impact them, right? They see it on the news and it's kind of like more entertainment. The average American cares about like, how is the economy doing? Is there inflation? Like, how are my kids going to do better? And like, it's crazy to me that just still because it's hard. It's like, what is the political platform that is actually just trying to drive that forward? I think you'd clean up. Like, and just, I guess like you have to win the crazies in the primary process in the party. So that's why you think you need to tack that.
I think that the transing of America's kids is broadly compelling. And it's like, you're talking about education and things like that. It seems like that's this place where people on the left are really willing to listen and come over to. And so it does feel powerful. And I think it's important, but if it's not enough, like you definitely have to have, he should, as Antonio was saying, like he should just run on Florida. Like
I kept it open during COVID. Done. Like, you want that level of competence as the government, the federal government, I'm going to do that.
He should be talking about, I mean, maybe he is, and I'm just not hearing it. It's not penetrating the sort of internet hive mind or like swarm where I receive most of my political information. But that is just like, things are going well here. The high-speed rail thing is exciting. Like, I mean, going to war, there are a couple, like the woke thing, when it takes you to war with Disney, that was really, that felt very cringy to me. It was like, first of all, I'm not trying to like go to war with Disney. Like, I don't want to see it. The
well, they're
woke
also
stuff's
doing the
annoying.
Snow White thing. So Disney's not helping themselves, but
No, they're not.
I agree.
They
It's
drag
a
themselves
stupid
into the
battle.
culture
Stupid
war.
battle. Don't fight with Disney.
But Disney's still a major a major Florida employer. And it's like, that city is very important to the economy of Florida. It seemed to me like, separate from the culture war piece, it seemed like he was attacking his own state a little bit to me. And that felt weird. It's like the opposite. You should be running on your state.
I wonder if it's as simple as what you said. He just can't meme. Like, every day we see Vivek, take some big take a hot take on the biggest issue of the day, and we just don't see DeSantis.
But Vivek, he's a 6 out of 10 memer or 7.
It might be only. I just find him so annoying. You guys,
but he's better than the other ones. But Trump is a 10 out of 10 memer, right? Like, he does a tweet and he does the capitalization and he does whatever, and it's just like, boom, you've just annihilated the news cycle. And so it's just like, he's good at memes, right? AOC, good at memes, like that. Like that. That's politicians in the 21st century with everyone addicted to their phones. Like, be good at memes, funny memes, right? Like not like cringe memes.
Hire Martin Shkreli as your memer in residence.
World War meme.
I do want to close out by something you alluded earlier, Solana. Let's talk about Thiel's legacy for 10 minutes or so. I'll sort of take a stab to set the conversation, and then Mike, I want to hear from you. Like, the way I think about Peter's history, and obviously, I'm an outsider here, but Peter, at Stanford Review, diversity myth, which we've talked about, then creates this iconic company in PayPal with the whole PayPal mafia. Then, after the success of that, starts his big hedge fund, Clarium, and runs that for a while, and that has sort of some success, but also some troubles. Sort of rebrands in the late 2000s as a venture capitalist, angel investor. He had been the whole time, but leans into it. Has iconic successes like Facebook, the iconic Founders Fund, Palantir, SpaceX, many successes, and becomes like a unquestionably successful as an investor, putting the Clarium thing way behind him, and works with people like you and many dozens of others for decades, totally making their careers. They go on to do incredible things, and credit their success to Peter. Also, it makes iconic bets early on, things that are very controversial, like charter cities with seasteading, longevity, higher education with the 20 or 20 things that were destroyed at the time and now commonplace. And then also a number of intellectual contributions in terms of popularizing Girard, popularizing the sort of stagnation thesis. I think anti-wokeness, obviously the big Trump bet, taking down Gawker, sort of nuanced critiques of democracy in that famous essay, or libertarianism, even of a broken kind of cultural problem in the West. At the same time, when people think that too much tech is the problem, or too much progress, he's saying not enough progress, and that would become sort of more commonplace in a decade. What would you edit or add to that, Mike? How do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I think that it's funny. I don't often you don't often see a list like that, right? Like, but when you list it out, it's amazing what he's done. I think I've always felt that Peter is like the main guy in tech. I think he's the one that first of all, I love that he's not on Twitter. He just exists separately. He doesn't like lower himself into the mud, and I'm like, that's fine. Like, I'll live there. I'll do all the mudslinging that needs to be thrown from the sewers. Like, stay out of there. Yeah. You see, there are so many people who, like, even when he's not spoken, when people are either for him or against him during the Trump years, you really saw this. The fact that he came out for Trump was like, it was psychologically damaging to a lot of people. Like, people had these crazy crises of identity, trying to grapple with that, and that's because they care so much about what he thinks. So many people who like don't like him really care what he thinks about them, what he thinks about the world. Everything he says becomes a story, and you see there. This is a weird one, and I don't want to name any names because it's really rude. But there are many leaders in tech now, sort of prominent figures, who they mimic like his cadence, the way that he speaks. I've seen people mimic the way that he walks, literally on a stage. He has this kind of, but I think that he will be remembered as the intellectual leader of the 21st century, early 21st century in the technology industry, and a major intellectual leader of intellectual leader in the world of politics. I think one of the most interesting legacies you alluded to a second ago when you talk about people he's worked with, and then something like the 20 under 20, it's like how many. My favorite thing about him actually is there are two. One is his curiosity, his genuine curiosity and what other people are thinking about. That's how he finds so many interesting ideas, is like he actually listens and he cares. He has no ego in this regard. What's one of the ways that he's come up with so many interesting things. But the other is he's a great mentor, and he's always recruiting, always. There's never a moment that he's not looking to meet interesting people who he can work with and help and support. And he's just like, I think that it's like the people around him. It's like, one, the fact that everybody wants to be like him, even if they don't admit it. And then two, it's the careers that he's created. And I think that's what he'll be known for.
I would add my two biggest things I think he did. One, take down Gawker, because I think, like, I don't know, that just doesn't happen very often. And that was a pretty important American institution, a new institution that I did not think was doing good in the world. It was, if anything, it was tearing people down for doing things. And so the fact that he took that down, I think, is probably net positive. And then I think 0 to 1, I mean, will be the thing that people remember him for. Like, compared to any other business book, I mean, it's I think the only intellectually interesting one, maybe outside of, some of like Clayton Christensen or a few things like that. But like this is like a practitioner, like actually in the arena. And so to get a work of kind of philosophy and business out, I think is, that 50 years from now, people will probably still read that book.
Just a quick note on the Gawker thing. The only time I ever had breakfast with Peter was right after, like the day of, or the day after the Gawker thing came out. And he was getting vilified for it. And he said that privately he had never gotten more praise for something. This is like of anything he's ever did. And it's just that cognitive dissonance was fascinating.
Well, last thought on that, because it ties into the college thing, and it ties into there are various things in the world of like spaces and technology and trends and whatnot. What Peter is really amazing at identifying in terms of concepts or ideas or positions is like the thing that people actually care about but can't say or won't say. And Gawker was one of these things. It's like he finds these points where people are actually on board with the topic, but it's like this small group of people who are controlling the discourse who are not. And it's like a thing that feels really terrifying to go and speak on. But if you just do it, if you have some courage, actually, like, you'll have a tremendous amount of support behind you. And I've seen him do that in politics and in tech, like throughout my entire time that I've known him. Everything from, I mean, obviously the Trump stuff had enormous support, even in Silicon Valley, specifically on like the China topic, which nobody was talking about before Trump was running for office. And then to go back further, the 20 under 20, right? College. This is something that was unthinkable at the time among a certain class of person. But the average person who heard it was like, oh yeah, something's totally rotten in the world of academia. Like, this entire machine is coming down. It can't last. And I think that's a really unique gift that he has intellectually, is to just, it's like the noise of people he does not hear. He just looks at the things and he says the obvious truth.
Yeah. Larry Summers called the 20 to 20 like the most misguided use of philanthropy in history, or something crazy.
That's my guy.
Yeah.
Well, the former president of Harvard would think that, of course. But, yeah.
One of Thiel's recent lines is, if you can't talk about it, if people won't let you talk about it, you should assume it's true, or something. That's a good note to wrap on Thiel. But before we wrap the episode, I just want to plug Pirate Wires really quick, because Solana, you just, I believe you hit your 3-year anniversary of starting Pirate Wires, over 100 personal issues in. Give us a little bit of where's Pirate Wires right now. What can people expect? You launched a new show recently. It's that people should check out.
Well, I've just been hiring, so I'm just doing more of what I used to do. It's like what I'm doing now is I'm Pirate Wires up until recently has just been me, and like it's like me with a megaphone, blasting my opinion out there into the universe, and like I'm still doing that, and that's still kind of that's like the flagship Pirate Wires. But hiring more people and sort of taking that perspective into our analysis of just like broad tech coverage, like aspirational science technology stuff. We're gonna get into politics. Eventually we'll have our own like political vertical. I want to do like health and fitness and things like this, but it's just like more of what we've been doing all along. So yeah, piratewires.com, check it out.
Awesome. Well, we'll be excited to have you back soon. Solana, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Turpentine is a network of podcasts, newsletters, and more covering tech, business, and culture, all from the perspective of industry insiders and experts. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from AI with Cognitive Revolution to Econ 102 with Noah Smith. Our other shows drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, and investors, like Moment of Zen and my show Upstream. We're looking for industry-leading hosts and shows, along with sponsors. If you think that might be you or your company, email me at eric@turpentine.co. That's ERIK@turpentine.co.